Right now, your brain is probably wired to crave something that's cheap, incredibly abundant, and honestly hiding right in plain sight. Welcome to this explainer where we're decoding the sweet trap of sugar. We're going to map out exactly what's happening in your neurobiology right this very second, and we'll track how global industry tactics have completely rewritten our food environments over the last half-century.
So, let's kick things off with a question that I know so many of us struggle with every single day. Why is the sweet stuff so ridiculously hard to quit? You know, it usually feels like a total lack of personal willpower, right? Just a daily failure to simply say no. But the reality is actually way more complex than that, and it's deeply rooted in both our ancient biology and our highly engineered modern environment.
To really wrap our heads around the scale of what we're dealing with, just take a look at this staggering number: 178 million tons. That is our global sugar consumption in a single year. And to put that massive figure into perspective, we jumped from about 130 million tons to this level in just over a decade. We are living in an era where sugar isn't a rare treat anymore, it's a cheap, relentless epidemic. And health authorities are desperately scrambling to adjust. The strict new 2025 to 2030 dietary guidelines have actually shifted from broad daily limits to highly specific, meal-based metrics. They're now saying we shouldn't go over just 10 grams of added sugar per meal. That is an incredibly tight threshold. And even more alarming, for kids under 10, those same guidelines drop that recommendation down to zero. Literally zero added sugars, all to prevent lifelong metabolic imprinting before it even starts. All right, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll map out the global sugar crisis, dive deep into your brain on sugar, uncover the big sugar deception, expose the hidden sugar trap lurking in your kitchen, and finally, look at a blueprint for reclaiming your metabolic health.
Section 1. The Global Sugar Crisis. Let's look at the sheer scale of this modern epidemic.
We are quite literally surrounded by a cheap and abundant epidemic. Eating way too much sugar is an indirect fuel for this unprecedented massive rise in obesity and non-communicable diseases we're seeing. The World Cancer Research Fund even notes that this environment is accelerating the growing rates of at least 10 types of cancer. Sugar is just everywhere. Heavily subsidized, constantly traded across borders, creating a world where overconsumption is basically the default expectation now, not the exception.
The contrast here is just stark when you measure reality against medical recommendations. The NHS says adults should cap their free sugars, so that's added sugars, syrups, fruit juices, at about 30 grams a day. That's roughly 7 sugar cubes. For a kid aged 4 to 6, it's just 19 grams. But get this, in our current food environment, a single standard can of cola has around 9 cubes of sugar. With just one drink, boom, you've instantly blown past the strict health limits designed to protect your metabolic and dental health.
Section 2. Your brain on sugar. Let's see how this macro environment actually pulls off a biological hijack inside your head.
This is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Research from the Max Planck Institute for Metabolism Research has uncovered this wild two-wave dopamine release that completely changes how we understand cravings. When you eat something sugary, your brain's reward system releases dopamine immediately the second that sweet taste hits your tongue. For people who strongly crave sugar, this first wave is massive. But here's the trick. The second wave of dopamine, the one released when the food actually hits your stomach to give you energy, is significantly diminished. So your mouth promises a massive reward, but your stomach barely registers it. Your brain is basically tricked into desperately wanting more because it never gets that chemical signal of satisfaction.
So the really crucial takeaway here is that chronic high sugar diets physically alter the structure of your brain. All that continuous overstimulation leads to dopamine D2 receptor downregulation. In plain English, you develop a tolerance. You physically need more sugar just to feel a baseline level of normal. Plus, it actually impairs your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that handles impulse control. It even fires up your endogenous opioid system, the exact same pathways that process pain relief and euphoria. It's literally a biological hijack that creates impulsive cravings mirroring actual substance use disorders.
But it's not even just your brain running the show. Your gut microbiome is in on it too. Through the gut-liver-brain axis, a specific bacteria called Bacteroides vulgatus produces vitamin B5. This sets off a hormone cascade ending with FGF21, which is essentially your body's chemical stop sign that tells your hypothalamus to suppress sugar cravings. But a high-sugar diet feeds the wrong bacteria, completely starving out the Bacteroides vulgatus. When that internal loop breaks down, your brain loses its chemical stop sign, leaving you with persistent food noise and cravings that feel entirely uncontrollable.
Moving into Section 3, the big sugar deception. How exactly did we end up engineering an epidemic with diets that cause this much biological chaos? Well, the timeline reveals what's often called the big sugar deception. Back in the 1960s, the Sugar Research Foundation literally funded scientists at Harvard to produce research that shifted the blame for heart disease squarely onto saturated fats, totally downplaying sugar. And that heavily influenced the huge 1980s low-fat movement. But what happened when manufacturers stripped the fat out of our food? They dumped in massive amounts of added sugar just to make it taste good again. Fast forward to the 2020s, and we are living through a massive peak in metabolic syndrome, a direct legacy of that historical bait and switch.
Today, we're up against a $68 billion global industry that controls the entire supply chain, from the sugarcane fields all the way down to those highly processed packages on the grocery store shelves. And to keep that immense volume moving, the industry frequently uses heavy lobbying tactics. They stigmatize soda taxes, fund counter-research, and fiercely fight against clear, front-of-package nutritional warning labels. This heavily funded resistance is exactly why it's still so incredibly confusing just to shop for healthy food for your family.
Section 4. The Hidden Sugar Trap. Armed with that history, let's talk about reading the labels and decoding the modern grocery store.
Food manufacturers have become absolute experts at hiding the sweet stuff. Because of that lingering, low-fat illusion, everyday savory foods are absolutely packed with sugar aliases. Your ketchup and barbecue sauce? Loaded with high-fructose corn syrup. Those healthy salad dressings? They use agave nectar to balance acidity. Even your savory canned soups use dextrose and glucose for preservation and flavor. You are eating dessert without even knowing it. And that is exactly why 90% of adults blow right past their daily limits without ever touching a candy bar. So to fight back against all this confusion, you have to visualize the invisible. Grams are abstract, but teaspoons, those are incredibly tangible. Use what's called the rule of 4. Whenever you look at a nutrition label, find the added sugars in grams and simply divide that number by 4. If a jar of pasta sauce has 12 grams of added sugar per serving, divide by 4. Boom. That is 3 actual teaspoons of sugar you are pouring directly over your dinner. This one simple math trick will instantly change how you look at your pantry.
Section 5. Reclaiming your metabolic health. Knowing everything we now know, what is the path forward to actually break free from this trap?
First off, I really want to validate the struggle here. We need to treat this like the metabolic rehab that it truly is. If you cut out sugar, your taste buds will physically adapt and get more sensitive to natural sweetness in just a couple of weeks. But the neurological recovery, that takes way longer. Full restoration of your brain's dopamine receptors, undoing that chemical tolerance we talked about, can take anywhere from 12 to over 14 months of sustained effort. White-knuckling it with sheer willpower alone just isn't going to carry you through a 14-month rewiring process.
Because willpower is notoriously unreliable, you have to design your environment. A brilliant, actionable strategy for this is Dr. B.J. Fogg's Tiny Habits framework. You basically link a microscopic new behavior to an existing anchor in your day. Like, after I clear the dinner table, there's your anchor, I will put exactly 1 sugary item from the pantry into the bin. That's the tiny behavior. Then you instantly celebrate. Give yourself a genuine, fun mental high five. That feeling of positive emotion actually rewires your brain so much faster than strict punishing discipline ever could.
But hey, you shouldn't have to fight this battle all by yourself. Individual habits are totally crucial, but we can't ignore the massive environment pushing against us. The World Cancer Research Fund heavily advocates for the nourishing framework as a public shield. This is calling on governments to step up, setting strict nutrition label standards, restricting junk food ads, and using economics to make whole, healthy food cheaper than ultra-processed sugar traps. We really need that combo of individual behavioral design and broad public policy to truly turn the tide.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. You succeed when you feel good, not when you feel judged. The science is incredibly clear here. Craving sugar is a physiological reality driven by a deeply engineered environment. It is not a moral failing. So take a look at your routine today. Bypassing the need for massive willpower, what tiny, celebratory step are you going to take right now to begin reclaiming your brain, your gut, and your health? The food industry isn't going to change its formula tomorrow, but you can change your habits today.